Okay, so welcome back to the third part of the login process of our login and register system. Here we're going to pass through the username and password and actually start to log the user in. So let's go ahead and do this. So we've got this else block here that we had. If all of these have failed, we come to this last else block. And what we do is we're going to set a variable login equal to the result of a login function. And the login function is going to pass username, and it's also going to pass password. Now, if this username and password combination work, we're going to return true, i.e. the user is successfully logged in or provided the correct information. If this returns false, we have an error. So we can build this, start to build this up before we even know, before we've even created this login function. So I'm going to say if login is equal to false, then append something else to this errors array. So let's say that username password is incorrect, or this username password combination is incorrect, because we know we've already checked if the username exists. Now otherwise we want to set the user session, and then we want to redirect the user. Oops, let me just comment again. Redirect user to home. So we need to create this login function now, and that's going to deal with actually checking these login credentials. So let's go ahead and create this function. Over to our users.php file, let's go ahead and create this down here. I'm going to say function login. Remember we called it login, and here remember we pass a username and we pass a password, and we want to sanitize. Both of these fields. In fact, we want to sanitize the username field, and we want to encrypt the password field. Now, remember we are storing our password in here as an MD5 hash, so we need to encrypt the password that the user provides in order to match it to the already encrypted password. So I didn't actually mention, well I did mention, but I mismentioned the fact that if this login is successful, we're actually going to go ahead and pass a user ID back instead of true. We're going to pass false if the login has failed, and we're going to pass the user's ID if the login is true. Now the reason we're doing this is because we're going to be storing the user ID here in a session if this password and username combination is successful. So we'll be storing that in a session. So we need to create a function that gets the user ID from the username. So let's go ahead and do that now. We'll create a function called user ID from username, and using passing through a username, we need to sanitize this. So username equals sanitize username, and then we need to return the user ID. So we can just say return MySQL result, and we want to pass a query here, row 0, i.e. the first row, and then we want to get the data, so user ID. There we go. So it's not as simple as that. We need to pass through a query, which will just be MySQL query select, remember backticks, user ID from, and which table? Users, where username is equal to, in single quotes, username. Okay, so we're selecting the user ID, which we're picking up here, and returning from the users table where the username is equal to the username we provided. So now we can use this function within our login function. So I'm going to say user ID is equal to user ID from username, and then pass in the username. Okay, so in actual fact now we need to think about this in terms of where we're sanitizing data. I'm passing through an unsanitized username here, which is being sanitized within this function. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take the username and I'm going to sanitize that again. Okay, because I don't need to sanitize it twice when I pass it through. So sanitize username, And I'm also going to reset the password because I need to encrypt it to an MD5 hash. So password. Okay, so I've sanitized my username and I've converted my password. Fine. Now we need to actually return whether this password, username and password combination have worked. So we're going to do exactly the same as the thing we did up here, and we're going to return a result based on the query. So return MySQL. Oh, sorry, no, we don't want to do that. We want to do a ternary operator, and we want to return the user ID or false. So within here, if this is equal to, or if this condition is true or is truthy, then we want to return the user's ID. Otherwise, we want to return false. So within here, what do we want to do? Well, we want to check that a MySQL result of a count is equal to 1. So quite, hard to explain, but let's go ahead and just do this. So if the MySQL result is equal to 1, and the MySQL result will be the count of us checking the username and the password together. So here is our query, this will be our row, and that's it. We just need to go ahead and write the query. So MySQL query. Now this is select, again count, user ID, from users, here in small or lowercase, and this is where, now this is where it gets interesting. So select the count from users where username is equal to username, and we'll just come over a bit, and password is equal to password. So essentially what's happening here is this username and this password need to match. If they do match and a record with Alex and the correct password is found, this result here will return 1. So therefore, if it's equal to 1, we return the user ID, i.e. the user has successfully validated their credentials. Otherwise, we return false. So now we've created our login function. Let's go ahead and test it out. So login equals login username and password. We're passing that through. If it's equal to false, then we do something. Otherwise, I'm just going to literally just echo OK, just so we know. So let's go ahead and remember the password that I encrypted in the first part of the tutorial, or the first part of the tutorial, where we actually did something with a database. This value basically represents the string password. Okay, so my password is password. So if I type in Alex and a load of rubbish, and I click login, nothing's happened. So let's check out what that might be. Okay, so I'm going to go back to init.php, and I'm just going to comment this error reporting out so we can get some errors output here. In fact, we'll leave that on while we develop anyway. So call to undefined function user ID from username. I appear to have spelled username incorrectly. So let's go over to our users.php, and there we go. Brilliant. So let's go ahead and refresh that and resubmit the data. Okay, so we're now getting the error that username password combination is incorrect, which is good because I did type in the wrong password. So again, I'll type in the wrong password, we get that error. So now I'm going to go ahead and type in password, the text password, and click login, and you'll see it just says OK. So I've supplied this form with the correct username and the correct password, and it's validated, and we are able to log in. We haven't actually logged in yet, but we are going to set the user session and redirect the user back home. So I'll go ahead and get rid of this OK exclamation, and if we have logged in correctly, we want to, in fact we'll leave that to just a moment. What we're going to do now is we're going to print these errors out properly. We're going to, in fact no, let's go ahead and set the user session. It's a lot more interesting. So we've already set the, or started the session up the top here, so we can use sessions within any page that we've included in it, and in here we have. So we want to go ahead and set this user session. So the user session that we're going to call, we're going to call the user session user ID. So I'm going to say session user ID, and this is going to be equal to login. Now, why is it equal to login? Well, it's equal to login because login returns the user ID. So now we have logged in successfully, returned the user ID, which in my case is 1. So if we do here die login, you'll see that when we refresh, it returns 1 because I've logged in with the user 1. So we store that in the session, which we're doing here, and then we redirect the user to wherever, and then we can exit the script underneath. Not required, but it's just a habit. So we're going to redirect the user back to index.php. So we're done. If we are logged in, or if we provide the right details, and then we log in successfully, we set a session, and that session holds our user ID, which uniquely identifies us while we're browsing the website. Then we redirect ourselves back to index.php. Okay, so now we need to look at actually testing whether this works, and then we'll look in another part, the next part of the tutorial, about clearing up these errors and things like that, or outputting them correctly onto the page. How do we test if we are successfully logged in or not? Well, let's go over to index.php. And let's just create a bit of logic down here to check whether this session has been set. And we'll be creating a logged in function in just a moment, and you'll see how much easier it is. Let's go ahead and do this. So I'm going to say if is set $_session user ID echo logged in, else, so if the user is not logged in. Okay, so this is just going to appear on the index page. So let's go back. You'll see at the moment it says not logged in because the session's not set, i.e. we haven't registered. We haven't successfully logged in. If I go ahead and say Alex and a load of rubbish and click enter, that username password combination is incorrect. And by the way, if you've already wondered, this lot here will be output a lot nicely at some point, and we will include the overall template as well, so it will all be included within our nice design. So if I now enter password, as in my actual password, and click login, you'll now see that we've been transferred back to index.php, and it now says logged in. So now whatever we do on this page, whether we refresh or navigate away and then back again, we are still logged in because the session is set. However, we don't want to be writing this code out here every time we want to check if a user's logged in or not. We want to create a handy function that allows us to, visually see, is the user logged in. So let's go ahead and create the function that does that. We'll get rid of this code here. So in users.php, let's go ahead and write this at the top. So function logged in. And essentially this is just going to return true or false, whether or not the user is logged in. So I'm going to say return either true or false, and the condition within here is set $_session user ID. Okay, so now what we can do is on any page we can say if the user's logged in, do something, otherwise do something else. So the perfect example would be in our aside, where we're including login at the moment, but we want to include the login form only if the user is not logged in. So I'm going to say if something else, do this, and this is if logged in is equal to true, echo logged in. So when I now go ahead and refresh, you see that the sidebar has changed. We no longer have this login form, but obviously we want to test this the other way around. We want to test whether, what's going to happen when the user's logged out. So we need to quickly create a logout script, and this isn't part of the login, but it does tie in. It's very, very straightforward. So we create a new file, and I'm going to call this logout. I'm going to save it in our root directory. And I'm going to start the session. So before we terminate a session, we need to actually start the session. And by the way, we're just going to be redirecting our users to this logout.php file to log them out. So session start, and then we say session destroy, and it's that simple. And then we just redirect our user, so we can redirect them to index.php. So to log our user out, we're logged in at the moment. We go, or we forward them, and we'll create all the links and the visuals later. Logout.php, that redirects us back, or it terminates the session, redirects us back, and here we see our code again, because the if statement has decided that, has seen that the session hasn't been set, and therefore it wants to go ahead and display this here. So yeah, that's basically it for logging the user in. There's a lot more to do here, and there's a lot more to tidy up. Obviously, we've done quite a lot in this kind of thing. The next thing really is to output these errors, and I think actually what we'll quickly do is we'll go ahead and we'll include the header files. So remember, the header files are included within includes, overall, and then whatever it is. So includes overall header.php, and then down here we can go ahead and include overall includes overall footer.php. And then again, when we refresh, if I type in some gobbledygook wrong, we get all these errors appear here. Obviously, they're still in sort of a visual representation of an array, which we don't want. We want to nicely output them to the user and give them a nice friendly header to warn them that their login has been unsuccessful. So we'll be doing that in the next part and sorting out these errors here. But for now, that's how we've logged in a user and the very basics of doing so.